The man on the floor was going to die in 90 seconds, and the only person in that mansion who could stop it was a woman they had all decided didn't matter. Amara Osei was on her knees in the middle of a marble room that cost more than she would earn in 3 lifetimes, and her hands were inside a stranger's chest, and the blood was so warm it felt alive. Her scrubs were soaked black to the elbow. Somewhere behind her a clock was ticking. Somewhere behind her, 10 men who killed people for a living stood frozen, useless, watching a boy they loved slip away on the floor. And standing over her, close enough that she could feel the heat still coming off the barrel, was the most dangerous man in the city. He had a gun in his hand that had been fired 4 minutes ago. He had not blinked in what felt like an hour, and he leaned down, slow, until his voice was right at her ear, quiet in a way that was so much worse than shouting. "If he dies," C.O. Dujin said, "you die on this floor next to him." Amara did not look up. She did not stop moving. Her hands kept working inside the wound, steady sure, while every man in that room held his breath. And she said the one thing no one had ever said to C.O. Dujin and lived. "Then shut up and let me work." The room went cold. Nobody breathed, because nobody talked to him like that. Nobody. But to understand how a night shift nurse from a broke county hospital ended up on that floor, with her hands inside the brother of a Mafia king, being threatened with her own death, you have to go back 12 hours. To the night everything she thought was true about her small, tired, invisible life came apart. 12 hours earlier, Amara Osei was standing at a bus stop in the rain, counting change in her palm. She was 31 years old. She had $11.40 to last her until Friday. Her shoes had a hole in the left sole that she had fixed twice with tape, and the tape had given up, and now every step she took filled her sock with cold water. She did not cry about it. She had stopped crying about small things a long time ago, because if you cried about the small things you would never stop, and Amara could not afford to never stop. She had a shift to work. The bus came late. It always came late. She rode it across the city with her forehead against the glass, watching the good neighborhoods turn into the tired ones. And somewhere on that ride, she started humming without noticing. A low, soft tune, a lullaby her mother used to sing in a language Amara only half remembered now. She hummed it whenever the world pressed too hard. She did not know she was doing it. She never did. The county hospital where she worked was the kind of place the city forgot to fund. The lights in the east wing flickered. The elevator had been broken since spring. Half the staff had quit for better hospitals with better pay, and the ones who stayed because they had nowhere else to go, or because, like Amara, they could not walk past a person in pain without stopping. She was the best nurse on that floor, and everyone knew it. And no one said it, because saying it might mean paying her more. Osei, her supervisor, a thin, sour woman named Denise, caught her the second she clocked in. "You're on floor duty, and then you're covering the intake bay." Marcus called out, "That's a double. That's what covering means." Amara looked at her for a long second. She thought about the $11.40. She thought about the electric bill with a red stripe across the top sitting on her kitchen counter. She thought about the small framed photograph she kept face down in her locker because she could not bear to look at it and could not bear to throw it away. "Fine," she said. Denise was already walking off. "And fix your hair. You look like something the storm dragged in." Amara did not fix her hair. She worked. That was the thing about Amara that people missed when they were busy underestimating her. She did not argue. She did not perform. She did not beg for respect. She simply became so undeniably good at the thing in front of her that respect became the only sane response. It usually came too late. It usually came from the wrong people. But it came. That night it came in a way that would end the life she knew. It was 3 minutes past 2 in the morning when the intake bay doors slammed open and the world changed. They came in fast and wrong. Not paramedics. Men in black suits, expensive suits, soaked with rain and something darker, carrying a body between them like it was the most precious thing on earth. Behind them came more men, and the men had the flat, careful eyes of people who were always deciding whether to hurt you. One of them was shouting in Korean. Another was shouting in English for a doctor, now the best one right now. On the gurney was a boy. He could not have been more than 20. His face was gray. His shirt was black with blood from a wound high on the left side of his chest. And Amara knew before she reached him, in a way that good nurses always know, that this boy was very close to leaving. The surgeon on call that night was Dr. Pruitt. He was competent on a normal night. This was not a normal night. He took one look at the men in the suits, at the guns barely hidden under their jackets, at the sheer wall of danger that had walked into his sleepy county hospital, and something in him locked up. His hands started to shake. He froze, and a man walked in behind all of them, and the whole room changed temperature. He was not the biggest man there. He did not shout. He did not need to. He wore a dark coat, and he moved slowly, and every other dangerous man in that room shrank a little when he passed, angled their bodies toward him, waited on him. He had a stillness to him that was worse than any amount of rage. His eyes went to the boy on the gurney, and for just 1/2 of 1 second something cracked across his face, something almost human, before it sealed over into ice. This was C.O. Dugene. Amara did not know his name yet. She only knew that when he entered, Dr. Pruitt stopped shaking and started sweating, and the words that came out of the surgeon's mouth were the worst words a doctor can say. I can't. This is beyond what he needs a trauma center I can't be responsible for. C.O. Dugene looked at him. Just looked. And Dr. Pruitt actually took a step backward. The boy on the gurney made a sound. A small, wet sound. He was running out of time, and the only doctor in the room had just quit with his eyes. And Amara, oh say, invisible Amara, tired Amara, $11.40 Amara, stepped forward and put her hands on the boy and said, "Move. All of you. Move." Nobody moved. She looked up, and for the first time her eyes met C.O. Dugene's, and she did not lower them. I said move. He's got a tension pneumothorax, and he's bleeding out, and if you keep standing there breathing my air, he's going to die in front of you. Now clear the bay and give me a chest tube kit and somebody who isn't useless. For one held breath, the entire room waited to see what the still man in the dark coat would do to the woman who had just called his people useless. C.O. Dugene tilted his head very slightly, and he said one word, "Do it," and the room exploded into motion around her. What happened over the next 40 minutes, Amara would not fully remember afterward, the way you never fully remember the moments you spend entirely inside your own hands. She remembered pieces. She remembered driving the chest tube in and the awful, beautiful hiss of the lung reinflating. She remembered the boy's blood pressure crawling back from the edge of the cliff. She remembered barking orders at men who could have killed her without a thought, and them obeying her, fetching, holding, pressing where she told them to press. She remembered Dr. Pruitt standing uselessly by the wall, and she remembered, at one point, without any fear left over to spare, telling him to either scrub in or get out of her light. And she remembered, through all of it, C.O. Dugene watching her. Not the boy. Her. The boy lived. That was the first miracle of the night. Around 3 in the morning his color came back, and his numbers held, and Amara sat back on her heels on the filthy floor of the intake bay, drenched in a stranger's blood, shaking now that it was over, and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for years. The boy's name, she would learn, was Taeyong, and C.O. Dugene loved him like a son. Denise chose that exact moment to reappear, drawn by the commotion, not understanding yet what had walked into her hospital. She saw Amara on the floor, saw the blood, saw the chaos, and did what small people do. She reached for control. Oh, say, what in God's name? This is a catastrophe. This is exactly why I don't put you on. You've made a disaster of my intake bay. I want you to. She saved his life. The voice was quiet. It came from the doorway. Co. Dugene had not raised it at all, and yet every person in the bay went silent as if he had fired a shot. Denise turned, saw him fully for the first time, saw the men behind him, and the blood drained out of her face. This woman, Co. Dugene said, walking slowly into the room, his eyes never leaving Denise, did in 40 minutes what your doctor could not do at all. Your doctor stood against that wall and decided a boy should die because he was afraid of me. She was also afraid of me. She did it anyway. He stopped in front of Denise, close, and his voice dropped even softer. You have spent, I would guess, some years making this woman feel small. I have known her for 40 minutes, and I already understand she is the most valuable person in this building. What does that say about you? Denise could not speak. Her mouth opened and nothing came out. And here is the first small mercy the long night gave Amara. The vindication she had stopped hoping for. She did not gloat. She did not even smile. She just watched the woman who had belittled her for years stand frozen and speechless in front of a man who had seen Amara's worth in 40 minutes flat, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight for a very long time loosened, just slightly, just enough to remember what it felt like to breathe. She should have known that mercy is never free, not on a night like this, because while Amara was catching her breath, Co. Dugene had already made a decision about her life, and he had not asked. They took her to a side room to clean up. 2 of his men stood outside the door, and she understood, slowly, that they were not there to protect her. They were there so she could not leave. She was still processing this when she heard the sound from the room next door. Not loud sounds. That was the terrible part. There was a man in the next room, a man Amara would later understand had been the one who let Taeyong get shot, a man who had failed in his one job of keeping the boy safe, and Co. Dugene was in there with him. Amara pressed her ear to the wall without meaning to. She heard Co. Dugene's voice, calm, unhurried, almost gentle. She heard the small sound of glass being set down on a table, deliberate, careful, like a man with all the time in the world. She heard him ask the man one question, quietly, and she heard the man begin to beg. And then she heard Co. Dugene say, in a voice with no anger in it at all, a voice as flat and cold as a frozen lake, that he was disappointed because he had trusted him, and that trust in their world was the only currency that mattered, and that a man who spent it carelessly had nothing left to spend. She did not hear a gunshot. Somehow that was worse. She heard a door. She heard footsteps leaving. She heard, very clearly, that the begging had stopped and would not start again. And when Co. Dugene walked past the open door of her room a minute later, he did not look like a man who had just done something monstrous. He looked exactly the same as before. He paused. He glanced at her, at the blood still on her forearms, at the way she had gone completely still against the wall. And he said quietly, "You should eat something. You have been on your feet for hours." Then he was gone. Amara stood alone in that room and understood, all at once and all the way down, exactly what kind of man had decided she was valuable. A man who could end a life in one room and worry about whether she had eaten in the next. The gap between those two things did not make him less frightening. It made him more, because it meant the tenderness was real and the horror was real, and they lived in the same man, and there was no telling which one you would get. She wrapped her arms around herself, and without knowing she was doing it, she began to hum. Hannah found her that way an hour later. Hannah was an older woman, sharp-eyed, elegant in a plain way, and she ran Co. Dugene's household with the quiet, total authority of someone who had earned it over decades. She brought Amara a change of clothes, a bowl of hot soup, and news that landed like a door closing. "You are coming with us," Hannah said. It was not unkind. It was simply final. Taeyong cannot be moved to a hospital. Dugene will not risk a paper trail, not with the boy this week, not with the enemies we have. And your doctor cannot be trusted. So the boy needs a nurse who saw nothing and says nothing. You saw everything. That makes you the nurse. I have a job, Amara said. I have a life. Hannah looked at her, not without sympathy. Do you? And Amara, to her own horror, did not have a fast answer. I can't just disappear, she tried. People will notice. My mother, someone will notice. Something flickered across Hannah's face at the word mother. Just a flicker. Amara was too rattled to catch it then. She would remember it later, and it would matter. You will be paid, Hannah said, more than that hospital pays you in a year for a few weeks of work. You will keep the boy alive, and when he is well, you will go home richer than you came, and you will forget this house exists. She set the soup down, or you will refuse, and things will become difficult in ways I would not wish on you. I'm telling you the first path because I like you. Please take the first path. Amara wanted to refuse. Every sensible cell in her body wanted to refuse. But she thought about the electric bill with the red stripe. She thought about the shoes with the hole. She thought about her mother, whose care cost more each month than Amara could carry, whose good days were getting rarer. She thought about the face-down photograph in her locker and the reason it was face down. And she thought, with a bitterness that surprised her, that Hannah was right. She did not have much of a life to disappear from. A few weeks, Amara said. A few weeks, Hannah agreed, and they both pretended to believe it. The house they took her to was not a house. It was a fortress pretending to be a house, set behind walls at the edge of the city, quiet and vast and cold. They gave her a room near Tiang's, and she settled into the work because the work was the one thing in the world that always made sense to her. She kept the boy alive. She changed his dressings and watched his fever and sat with him through the worst nights, and slowly, day by day, he began to climb back toward the living. And she began, against every instinct she had, to notice things about Co. Dujin. She noticed that he came to sit with Tiang every night, late when he thought the house was asleep. He never touched the boy. He just sat, a silent shape in the dark, watching him breathe, and Amara understood that this terrifying man was, in his own frozen way, praying. She noticed that he never raised his voice, not once, and that this was the single most frightening thing about him, because the men around him were more afraid of his softness than they would have been of any shouting. She noticed that he watched her, and that when she caught him watching, he did not look away like a normal person would. He simply held her eyes, calm, unreadable, until she was the one who had to look away, her heart doing something she did not give it permission to do. And one night, deep in the third week, something happened that she could not explain away. She had been awake for 30 hours. Tiang had spiked a fever and she had fought it down through the night. And now, gray dawn coming through the windows, the boy finally sleeping soundly, she sat slumped in a chair beside his bed, too tired to get up, too wired to sleep. She had not eaten since the day before. Her hands were trembling from exhaustion and low blood sugar and the long, cold loneliness of a house where she trusted no one. She did not hear him come in. She only realized Co. Dujin was there when a plate appeared on the small table beside her. Warm food, rice and something that smelled of ginger and home. And beside it, a glass of water, set down with that same deliberate care she had heard through the wall on the first night, except that this time the care did not mean death. This time it meant something else entirely. You have not eaten, he said quietly. You never eat when he is bad. I have noticed. Amara stared at the plate. She was so tired her eyes stung. You've noticed. I notice everything. He was quiet for a moment. It is the only reason I'm still alive. She looked up at him then, and he was closer than she expected, crouched down to her level, so he was not looking down on her, and the gray light his face was not the mask he wore for his men. It was tired. It was human. His eyes moved over her face, over the exhaustion and the stubbornness and the grief she carried everywhere, and something in them softened in a way she was certain no living person had seen in years. Neither of them spoke. The moment stretched out, longer than it should have, one second past what was safe, and then another. He was near enough that she could have counted his breaths. She thought, wildly, that she should move away. She did not move away. Neither did he. And then the boy stirred in the bed, and the moment broke, and Co. Dujin stood and was himself again, closed and cold and careful. "Eat," he said, and he left. Amara sat there with a warm plate in front of her, and her heart pounding, and understood that she was in the most dangerous situation of her entire life, and it had nothing to do with the guns. Because she was starting to feel something for a man who ended lives before breakfast. And the worst part, the part that truly frightened her, was that some ruined and lonely place inside her had felt safer in that 30-second silence than it had felt in years. She did not sleep after that. She sat up and she made herself remember the sound of the glass through the wall on the first night, the begging that stopped, and she told herself, sternly, that whatever she thought she felt was a lie her exhausted heart was telling her. She had trusted the wrong person once before, catastrophically, and it had cost her the things she never spoke about. She would not do it again. Not with him. Especially not with him. But the wound in her, the one she never named, had already recognized something in him. And wounds do not listen to reason. The thing that broke the fragile quiet of that house came 4 nights later, and it came, as these things do, from a direction Amara never watched. Taeyong was strong enough now to talk. He was a sweet boy under all the danger, funny, loyal, painfully young, and he had come to adore the nurse who had pulled him back from the edge. He called her Nuna, older sister, and he told her things in his fever-loose way that he probably should not have. And on the 4th night, drifting on painkillers, half asleep, he said something that turned Amara's blood to ice water. He was murmuring about the night he was shot, about who had set the meeting, about how it was supposed to be safe, how someone on the inside had promised it was safe. And then he said a name, sleepy and certain, the name of the man who had sworn to him the meeting was safe, the man whose word had nearly gotten him killed. By Young-ho, Tai Young Mumblet. Byung-ho said it was clean. Byung-go, promizid. Byung-go, Co. Dujin's most senior lieutenant. His right hand, the man he trusted above all others. Amara sat very still, because if the boy was right, if it was Byung-ho who had sent Taeyong into that ambush, then the traitor Co. Dujin was standing at his own right side, and Co. Dujin did not know. She did not know what to do with this. She was a nurse. She was a prisoner. She was a woman who wanted only to survive her few weeks and go home. This was not her war. She told herself it was not her war. But she could not unhear it. And so, that same night, unable to sleep, she did the thing that would change everything. Taeyong needed a specific medication from the house's small lock supply room, and Hannah had given her a key, and Amara went to find it. The supply room was off Co. Dujin's private study, a part of the house she had never been allowed into. The study door was ajar. A single lamp was on, and Amara, telling herself she was only passing through, glanced at the desk as she went by. There was a file open on it. Photographs, documents, and her own face was looking back at her from the top of the pile. Amara stopped breathing. She moved to the desk on legs that did not feel like hers. The file was thick. It was old. There were photographs of her going back years before the night at the hospital. There was a photograph of her mother. There was a photograph of the small county hospital taken from across the street, months old. There were documents in Korean she could not read and documents in English she could, financial records, an address that used to be hers, a copy of a hospital shift schedule with her name circled. This was not a file made in 3 weeks. This was a file made over years. She had not stumbled into Co. Dujin's world by accident on the night Taeyong was shot. That was the lie she had been living inside. The truth was lying open on the desk in front of her in cold black and white. He had known who she was. He had known about her for a long time. The most dangerous man in the city had been watching a broke night shift nurse for years, and she did not know why, and the not knowing opened a pit under her feet that had no bottom. Her hand was shaking. She reached out and turned one of the photographs over, and on the back, in careful handwriting, was a date and 3 words that made no sense to her. 3 words that connected her mother to a night 10 years ago that Amara had spent a decade trying to forget, the night of the thing she never spoke about, the wound she never named. And she understood, all at once, that whatever had happened to her 10 years ago, the worst thing that had ever happened to her, the thing that had hollowed her out and left her humming lullabies to no one, it was not random either. It was connected to this house. It was connected to this man. And she began to hum, without knowing, standing in his study with his file on her life, open in her shaking hands. You were never supposed to see that file. Amara spun around. C.O. Dugene was standing in the doorway of the study. She did not know how long he had been there. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, but his eyes were fixed on hers with an intensity that pinned her where she stood. He stepped into the room, slow, careful, and reached back and closed the door behind him with a soft final click that sealed the two of them in together. I hoped I would have more time, he said quietly, before you understood. Understood what? Her voice was barely a whisper. Why do you have pictures of me? Why do you have pictures of my mother? What is this? Who are you? He looked at her for a long, long moment. And when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. And somehow that made it more frightening than any threat. I am the reason your life fell apart 10 years ago, C.O. Dugene said. And I am the only reason you are still alive tonight. Both of those things are true. Sit down, Amara. It is time you learned who you really are and what your family has to do with mine. And outside the sealed study door, unheard by either of them, a phone lit up in the dark hand of a man standing very still in the hallway. A man who had been listening to every word. A man named Byung-ho, who now knew that the nurse had seen the file, and who lifted the phone to his ear and said, in a soft, flat voice of his own, "It's time. Tonight. All of them. Comment below what you think C.O. Dugene is about to tell her, and who you think Byung-ho is really working for, because the answer in part 2 is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. Subscribe to Afro K Timeless Stories so you do not miss it. The truth about Amara's family, the truth about that file, and the reason the most dangerous man in the city has been watching over her for 10 years. It all comes next.